My name is Anna Canny. I'm the science communications lead here at the Natural Hazard Center, and I want to thank you all so much for joining us today for another session in our Disasters as Turning Points webinar series. This is a series we launched this year, and the idea really is to create a space for reflective conversations on some of the major disasters that have shaped our field. And so we convene panelists 5, 10, 15, 20 years later to sort of slow down and think about the impact that specific disasters had on research, policy, and practice. And so we'll be having a few more sessions in this series later this year. And so keep an eye out for those. We'll talk about them a little bit more at the end of today's session. Uh, a bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded, which I hope is especially helpful for our international colleagues. It's very, very early in Japan, and so not everyone will be able to join us, but you'll be able to find a recording and a transcript of today's conversation on our website tomorrow. And I also encourage you to check out previously recorded webinars in the series. We did one just last month on the anniversary of the Christchurch earthquake sequence. And so you can check out that conversation and others also on our website. A bit of housekeeping. Also, as I mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end of today's session. We're hoping to save some time for that. But as questions come to you throughout today's session, please head to the Q&A. You can drop your questions there. And I believe I've enabled a feature that you can all vote on which questions you'd most like to see. So if you maybe don't have a question of your own, but you see a question that catches your eye, give an upvote on that, and we'll try and save some time for those. Today's session will be marking the 15th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. A bit about why this disaster. So on March 11th, 2011, that's 15 years ago last week, a magnitude 9.1 earthquake struck off the northeastern coast of Japan, and it was the most powerful earthquake in the nation's history, the fourth ever most powerful earthquake worldwide since modern seismology began. Intense shaking, as you can imagine, caused widespread damage across the country. And perhaps even more significantly, it triggered tsunami waves, a series of destructive tsunami waves that devastated coastal communities. In the end, more than 18,000 people perished and thousands more were injured and displaced. So this is an extremely major event that is still felt by many, many communities in Japan to this day. It's also considered to be the costliest natural disaster in modern history, with estimated economic losses between 200 and 500 billion dollars. And so, as you can imagine, it profoundly shaped our understanding of and approaches to disaster preparedness, response recovery, and resilience. And so, I'm looking forward to getting into some of those elements today. I'll give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves more fully in just a second, but I wanted to express our gratitude for our excellent panel of speakers from universities across Japan. They come from multiple disciplines and they all have deep expertise on disaster research and resilience, and also specific expertise on this event. So we're really excited to hear from them. And as I mentioned, I'll give them a chance to talk a little bit more about what they hope to bring to today's conversation in a second. And I'd also like to introduce a guest moderator for today's session. In the past, I've moderated these conversations, but we're really excited to pass it off today to a longtime friend of the center and a longtime professor of disaster sociology at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. And so, without further ado, I will pass it off to Shigeo Tatsuki. Thank you so much. He really played an integral role in bringing together today's panelists and shaping the arc of today's conversation. And so, I will stop sharing my screen now and pass it over to Shig.
Hi, thanks, Anna. Hi, I am Shig Tatsuki. I'm a sociologist at the Doshisha University. Good afternoon and good morning for us. And thank you for joining us. This panel marks the 15th anniversary of a Great East Japan earthquake. And rather than looking back at what we already know, our focus today is on what we have learned over time and how those lessons can guide us forward. In particular, we center our discussion on three key dimensions. First, how recovery has unfolded across urban planning, housing, community reconstruction from gender perspective, and long-term life recovery. Second, what kind of social and institutional transformations have emerged in the aftermath of the disaster? And third, which is my favorite part, how we can evaluate these transformations based on empirical evidence accumulated over the past 15 years. And the core of this panel is a shared reflection. This is the part we would like to really focus. If we were given the chance to start over again, what would you do differently? This is not simply reflective or retrospective question. It is an invitation to rethink how we design recovery, how we support affected populations, and how we build more inclusive and evidence-based disaster governance going forward. With that in my mind, let us begin our discussion. First, they are all my friend, Iuchi Kanako, or Kanako Iuchi, yeah, rather, PhD from Champaign, Illinois, and she's a associate professor at the Tohoku University. So the floor is yours, Kanako.
Well, thank you, Shig, and thank you everybody participating from all over the world. I'm really impressed that how you have been able to get up and or still being up at nighttime. But anyway, um, I've got an assignment from Shig that I to unfold 15 years of recovery. And then so I will be talking about that in 8 minutes, hopefully. And so just a little bit about myself. I'm a planner by training, and so this narrative I will be navigating from my planning perspective. And my research interest is broadly how can people live sustainably in changing environment in a disaster like this as well in Tohoku, and how I've been involved in long term of the recovery of disaster in different places. So I am more interested now on how the time affects decisions of policymakers, communities, and what are the outcomes as a result of decisions that we made in the process. So now, talking about Tohoku, I feel that there are a few time in recovery that I need to focus. And then the first thing is the beginning of recovery. That's where convergence actually happen. And looking back, there was a couple of words that I would like to highlight. One is unprecedented. We did talk about unprecedented scale of disaster because of 22,000 people have been perished. And because of this shocking damage that we experienced, the recovery was basically avoiding future tsunami hazard. And so that was hazard averse rebuilding. And it was done really aggressively. Sometimes in recovery policy paper, it said aggressive recovery. You want to have the infrastructure developed. And then by doing so, economy of Japan will also revitalize. And it was nationwide recovery, and it was probably the first time having the nationwide paired government assistance from the local governments to the affected local governments. Also, the private sector, like the big names, were involved in the recovery as well. And so when it comes to the recovery of avoiding hazard, it was focused on the structural measures. And namely, that's about the levee construction along about 400 kilometers of the Tohoku coast. And so sometimes it's been you know, defined as Great Wall of Tohoku. And then also massive land elevation, and then also a lot of residential relocation to the mountainous side had taken place. Because by doing so, the government wanted to have people live in higher land and then to be safe, even if the tsunami of what happened at 311 happens again. 2011 was when Japan was still having the economic power, but was forecasted with the population decline. And so recovery of Tohoku was considered a booster for Japan's sustainable development, especially that aging and depopulation was kicking in at the time. And with that, the innovation and technology were also underlying together with the structural measures. And so investment to avoid future hazard was enormous. And I just want to give some number. In total, in 2026, the amount that's been invested in recovery is 42 trillion yen, which is about 300 billion US dollar in current exchange rate, which yen is really weak now. Among these 42 trillion yen, 32% has been used for relocating communities and also elevating the land and also having public housing. 16% of which were used for seawalls and highways. And then just a little bit offside, but 20% has been used for the nuclear recovery fund money. And but all these were done with the national standards. So new communities that's been rebuilt on higher land. It does look like subdivisions in Tokyo, and we no longer see in small ocean because of the concrete wall that we have along the coast. To reverse the depopulation trend, effort to increase visitors and non-resident population existed, and coastal city government together with non-profits aim to attracting businesses and immigrants to the coastal area. For instance, like nonprofits initiated connecting local fishermen, private firms, city residents, and outside communities to explore investors as well as successor of fishermen struggling from aging already. So these kind of efforts sustained for the first 5 to maybe 7, 8 years to strengthen communities while infrastructure were under construction. Right before 10-year, 2019 COVID hit, and it was a game changer. People couldn't interact, people couldn't visit the coastal area, and so that caused stagnancy and aging, and depopulation could not stop in the coastal areas. So for instance, in Rikuzen Takata City, before the earthquake in 2010, there were a population about 24,000. But in 2025, it's about 17,000, which is about 28% drop. It's similar also in Kesenuma, about 25% drop, and also Kamaishi, which is 28% drop as well. So it's along the coast about the population decline is that level. In 2026, coastal area left with the enormous concrete walls, roads, and great facilities like concert halls, museums, government offices that's been upgraded. And but if you go, the coasts are pretty quiet, and we see people sporadically. And it is definitely the time after the drawback of recovery effort. People had finished their work and left, and coastal communities and governments are left with financial burden to maintain all these infrastructure that being constructed. So planners perhaps had thought of this along the way, but could not stop and consider, rethink about it, and follow through the original plan. And it perhaps was the responsibility of policymakers and planners, as well as academics, or even the individuals to say no. But it was difficult due to the culture of their era, as well as the region, as well as lack of imagination at that time. So for concluding, I didn't really include about the Fukushima situation, which is still underway. But altogether, I feel that Tohoku recovery was on the traditional development model, where structural investment will naturally lead to economic model, given the social economic growth. So time is a huge factor that and socioeconomic situation is also crucial in influencing recovery. And I'm not really sure yet what would be the next step, but we definitely need to start thinking about the sustainability after the hitting the growth limits. So that's my talk. Muted. Shig, you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you, Kanako. And keyword appeared, sustainability, and that word we will hear more often. The next speaker is Tamio Kondo. She is a PhD from Kobe University, and she also worked with us at the DRI, the Disaster Museum. Okay, so floor is yours.
Okay, good morning from Japan. I'm Tamio from Kobe University. I'm teaching housing and urban planning in the university. It is an honor to reflect on 15 years since the Japan tsunami with all of you. So even today, many coastal communities still shows visible traces of the disaster. But my research examines how residential relocation reshaped coastal cities after the tsunami and how the places people left behind might still remain meaningful communities. So after the tsunami, many residents have to decide where to rebuild their homes. So some moved through government collective relocation programs, but many others moved individually based on their own decisions. I studied this individualized housing reconstruction. So, example, by questionnaire survey, I analyzed why households decide to relocate individually. The main reason were that they want to rebuild quickly. They cannot wait for the collective relocation by the government and wanted to decide by themselves where to live. And also by mapping these residential relocation, I visualize how the spatial structure and spatial patterns of the coastal cities changed. Okay, so my research reveals that individual relocation led to several unintended and negative impacts. First, individual relocation triggered urban sprawl and low density development in shrinking cities. I think this might be unsustainable for urban management and also unwalkable cities for the resident. Second, in some mountainside location, the relocation created new risk, such as landslide. The policy intended to reduce tsunami risk produced new vulnerabilities, which might be called as a maladaptation. Okay. And third, relocation also created urban fragmentation, including social and spatial. So I think these findings are what I worked on during the first half of past years. So I think planning cannot fully control where people choose to live, and how to guide sustainable and livable residential relocation remains a question for planners and also for me, myself. So after the tsunami, the national government made intensive efforts to reduce risk through a multiple layered approach, combining levees and hazardous zone setting and land raising and collective relocation. This was the first time Japan designated hazardous zone on such large scale. Across the affected Tohoku region, about 16,000 hectares were designated, and around 37,000 households were targeted for relocation and government buyout. So to give a sense of scale, the area is almost the 3 times of the size of Manhattan in New York. And also the population density is much lower, which is 5% of that of Manhattan. And the hazardous zone in Tohoku region redeveloped intensively for the industrial and commercial land use or memorial park by the national government. And in the aftermath of the disaster I think a few years, I thought that this policy seems very reasonable to me. However, through the year of research, I began to ask a different question. So is disaster recovery really mean about the separating people from high-risk areas? And how should we regenerate the empty land after people left? This is what I have working on the second half of the past 15 years. So after a decade, I started to conduct more in-depth field survey in the hazardous zone. So I remember that one resident once said to me, "What does it mean that place I loved is now called as a hazardous red zone?" What I found there was that former residents were trying to imagine or reshape their places, lands where they could no longer live, into new kind of places, such as community gardens and skateboard parks and campground, and even initiative to transform their residential area to a forested landscape. These efforts involving former residents and sometimes new visitors, and often play an important role in passing on the memory of the disaster. I would describe this as a post-disaster place remaking, a place in which people actively reshape the physical environment and start new activities and redefine the meaning of the places for themselves. So what lessons can we draw 15 years after the tsunami? If I could go back 15 years, I would not rely on the top-down land regulation by the government sector. Instead, I would encourage land governance where multiple actors discuss how to live and cope with risk and how to reshape land together. The key question is now how to fill empty spaces with new land use development, but rather how to regenerate these spaces as a meaningful places for people living today. Because post-disaster risk recovery discussion tends to focus on risk mitigation and also future generations. However, we cannot achieve a good recovery without creating people that people living there today truly love. Okay. So how to regenerate red zone area is a global challenge. Christchurch in New Zealand experiences severe liquefaction also 15 years ago, is still working on this. So how we should regenerate these areas will differ depending on the types and the frequency of the hazard and also the scale of the risk and specific context, history, and character of each places. And designating a red zone in area with repetitive loss from flooding is totally different from the Tohoku coast, where this risk reduction is based on a once in a 1,000-year tsunami. So while the importance of land use management for this risk reduction is widely recognized by planners, but we now need to move beyond this. We should reconsider new forms of land governance approach that takes into account not only risk reduction, but also the negative impact of separating people from the land, and then rethink the relationship between people and the places. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamio. This is really thought-provoking. Okay, now we will move on to the gender issues during the recovery. Miyako, please turn on your microphone. She's a PhD from Tohoku University and also a fellow and associate professor at the Tohoku University, and also she's close appointed as a research fellow, I believe, at UCL. Miyako, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity. as I explained that this year marked 15 years since the Great East Japan earthquake and the tsunamis. Over the period, Japan has made significant progress with the Kanako and the Kondo Sensei has already explained, and the rebuilding infrastructure and the strength of disaster preparedness. At the same time, this moment invites us to reflect not only on what we have been achieved, but also what remain efficiently addressed. And shortly after disaster, I just talking about my small background. I made a decision because I used to work as freelance photographer, and I made a decision that changed the courses of my life. I choose not to bring my camera, and instead of devote myself to volunteer work in affected communities. Until then, I had worked with someone who documents, and however, in that moment, I felt it was more important stand alongside the people, and rather than observe them. Through this experience, I encountered many individuals whose voices were not easily heard. Elderly people, women, caregivers, and persons with disabilities. And what I came to understand was that those who found it hardest to speak were often those facing the greatest difficulties. This experience became the start point of my research. My subsequent work has been shaped by the testimony and materials collected in affected communities, include Ikita Akashi, or the proof of life, collected by the Otsuchi, Iwate Prefecture, devastated damaged by the tsunamis and also the earthquake, and collected by the monks. This archive was developed through the effort of this Buddhist monk working closely with local community. Actually, their family created the local shelters of themselves and include photographs and personal belongings story and everyday record as well. Those materials show not only how the people died, but how they lived before the disasters. Through this quantitative analysis of those materials, it was contained 620 people's voices. I came to understand that the disaster are not only physical event, they are also social process that shape who's lived and recognized. With losses as remembered and whose experience remain invisible. In particular, my research highlighted in the gendered demonstration is the disaster and the social memory. Even in process such as identification and remembrance, existing inequality can be reflected and produced. And today, I would like to focus on one central question. If I had been given the opportunity to take initiative in gender equality from the very onset of the disaster, what would I have done differently? Based on both my research and field experience, I would highlight three key points. And first, I would prioritize gender respective and gender inclusive is needed assessment from the outset. A disaster response system are often assumed to be natural inequality and also, however, they are not. And the needs of women, elderly people, caregivers, and persons with disabilities, and people of very difficulties timing even before the disaster are frequently overlooked and early stage. If we had systemically collected disaggregated data by gender, age, disability, and caregiver roles, we could have better understood diverse needs and respond more effectively. And second, I would ensure that women are included decision-making process from the very beginning, and also the voice from the caregivers. In many communities, the woman played essential role in the managing evacuation center, distributing supplies, and supporting vulnerable individuals. Yet those contributions were often informal and not reflected in formal decision-making structures. If women had been included as decision makers, is included like so many voices from the outset, issues such as privacy, hygiene, prevention of gender-based violence, and caregiving support could have been addressed more appropriate. The woman leadership must be embedded from the earlier stage of disaster response. And thirdly, I would place greater emphasis documenting life experience and social memory. The Ikita Akashi and purpose of life achieved shown the memory is not simply about preserving the past. It is about recognizing dignity, identity, and the meaning of life. If we had begun systematically recording testimony and everyday experience from the early stage, we could have built a more inclusive narrative of the disaster. One that recognizes not only loss, but also care, relationship, and resilience. At the same time, future disaster response must contribute social inclusion with innovation. Recent disasters, including Noto Peninsula earthquake, have shown that aging community and remote settlement and distributed transport network require a new approach as well as technologies. In such context, too, such a drone and satellite-based system, I saw so many places actually can play an important role. They can support rapid damage assessment, reach isolated communities, and improve coordination across response effort. However, innovation alone is not sufficient. Technology must design in the user way that respond to the vulnerability communities. In other words, innovation must be based human-centered. So if we combine technological innovation with gender and social vulnerability perspective and policy, community leadership, and careful attention to local voices, disaster response can become both more effective and more equitable. Those priorities, the gender respective assessment, and inclusive decision making, the document of life experience, and the people-centered innovation are closely integrated. Together, they form the foundation of a more inclusive and human-centered approach to disaster risk reduction. In closing, I would like to emphasize that gender equality is not an additional consideration disaster response. It is not something to be addressed at the larger stage, at the later stage. It must be integrated from the very beginning. At the same time, we must build disaster systems that are not only more inclusive, but also more innovative, capable of reaching those who are isolated, overlooked, or difficult to access. If we are in honor to live in lost in the Great Japan earthquake, we must ensure that those lessons on gender, social vulnerability, memory, and innovation are meaningfully reflected in future disaster policy and practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Miwako. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to what the GJ was the incident to create the social change. We would like to have Tatsugano take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. My English is so poor, so I'll ask Tatsuki Sensei and PowerPoint to help. Just a moment. Today, I will report on the result of the social network survey of the third sector or non-profit sector that were active in the Great East Japan earthquake. From this survey, I understood two important points. One is that the ability of third sector organization to solve social problems is defined in the structure of social networks. The The other is that the social network hubs have role as a boundary spanner, effectively fostering new initiative and policy innovation. Let me show you the agenda of this report. This report has two parts. First, I will introduce that background of report. Apparently, the area where third sector activities of the Great East Japan Earthquake were successful was city with a long tradition of collaboration of various organizations and sectors. Therefore, I will tell you the importance of examining the social networks cultivated by the tradition. After that, I will speak about the structural characteristics of third sector social networks from the social network survey. The first is background. I observed that the collaboration among the third sector organizations, the local governance and companies, strongly propelled forward Sendai City's support and relief operations for the people affected by the earthquake. In just less than 3 months after the earthquake, Sendai City and the Personal Support Center, that is a third sector organization in Sendai City, began to work together, accept volunteers from various NPOs to provide support to the people living in temporary houses. The picture shows the support provided the collaboration project worked on by Sendai City and the Personal Support Center to those living in temporary houses. This project established a model for disaster case management in Japan. It also introduced to Japanese society the effective method for rebuilding the lives of disaster victims that Dr. Kami would later discuss. Because before the earthquake, Sendai City has highly valued and promoted the collaboration between residents and the local governance, so they were able to do this kind of response. In Japan, the third sector legal infrastructure was developed in 1998 as an NPO law. This was quite slow in the developed world. Since Sendai City had a long tradition of collaboration before that, it responded quickly to the NPO law. After discussions with residents, Sendai City put into force the ordinance for promotion of citizen public interest activity in April 1999 and opened Japan's first facility, established by a local government and operated by the third sector organization to support third sector organizations' activities. I thought that I could approach the mechanism for solving social problems by third sector organization by examining the relationship between people and people that reflect such a tradition of collaboration. Next, today's main dish. I did third sector social network survey in 2016. The method is social network survey with snowball sampling. Third sector trusted key person. First, I interviewed a third sector key person living in the disaster area to hear his experience and residence history, as well as identify up to 10 people he trusts. The 10 people are not limited to third sector. It may be an administrative employee or a person from commercial companies, or may not be living in a disaster-stricken area, or may not be acquainted before the disaster. However, the following interviewees are limited to those in the third sector who have lived in the affected area. I conducted this interview with 80 people, one after another. This is more about the method, but I will skip it because I don't have time. This is more about method 2. I will only explain the important thing. I conducted 80 interviews and grasped 459 key persons. Logically, it should be up to 800 people. but there will be people who have been appointed more than once. The breakdown consists primarily of 249 third-sector organization staff, 55 civil servants, and 74 commercial enterprise staff. This is a social network centered from the third sector before the earthquake. The points represent key persons arranged in an elliptical pattern by region. The size of the point is the number that interviewees have nominated as a trusted key person. Only Sendai City has many connections. Next is a situation 6 months after the earthquake. You can see that various networks were formed from all over Japan. This is 1 year after. This is 2 years after. This is 3 years after. 4 years after. 5 years after. This is at the time of survey. Analysis of this the structure of this social network reveals important characteristics. The social network structure of the third sector from before the earthquake was a scale-free network to which the power law applies. Scale-free networks are found in many complex networks such as the internet and the actor collaboration in movies, such as do you know Kevin Bacon index and characterized by structural robustness and efficient information transfer. The structure of social networks has not changed significantly since before the earthquake, and information about resources and reputation can be transmitted quickly and efficiently through a few hubs. These hubs part a very important role. Hubs create the structural characteristic of scale-free networks. So what kind of people are hubs? We analyzed whether it was hub by the binomial logistic regression analysis that input human, organizational, and regional attributes as variables. Typically, a person who belongs to intermediary support organizations, a person who can easily create connection with other sectors, such as having experience of working side by side with other sectors and joining business groups. And these are regional differences in the existence probability of hubs. I think it happens because of traditional collaboration. Through their mediation on the ground, knowledge regarding various issues is efficiently disseminated to other regions and the government, effectively giving rise to various new initiatives and policy innovations. Disaster case management in Japan and the legal reforms that facilitate case management are prime examples of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You did very well. Now, the last speaker, not the least, but Fuminori will show the empirical evidence on how effective the disaster case management was. Thank you. Fuminori-san, you have the floor.
Hey, thank you for introduction. I'm Fuminori Kawami from the University in Japan. I would like to move straight to main part of my presentation because it's 8 minutes. In this presentation, I will focus on our findings from empirical research on housing recovery after the Great East Japan earthquake disaster. Okay. First, let me introduce the study area. The study area comprised 2 cities, Sendai and Natori City, located in Miyagi Prefecture, which were heavily affected by Great East Japan earthquake disaster. Sendai is the largest city among the disaster-affected area, and Natori served as a commuter town for Sendai. To analyze the housing recovery in these 2 cities, we obtained data on the housing recovery at the household level for each city. The data for Natori City is based on mail survey conducted among all households that resided in temporary housing. The data for Sendai City is based on open data provided by Sendai City government, which was publicly available on their website, especially regarding the residents of temporary housing. Both data sets includes the number of months from the disaster until the household moved out of temporary housing as a dependent variable. Then the gender of household head and family size are included as an independent variable. I divided results into two sections. Let's move on first one. The following slide shows who were left behind in temporary housing using survival analysis. This graph shows housing recovery over time in Natori City and Sendai City. The vertical axis shows housing recovery rate, which indicates the proportion of households who have moved out of temporary housing. The horizontal axis shows time. And the blue line indicates the male-headed household, and the red line indicates female-headed household, typically single mother. The right side of the graph shows the results based on Natori City data, while the left side is Natori City data, and the right side is Sendai City data based on Sendai City data. And the right gray line indicates the timing of when the disaster case management support was implemented. In Sendai City, there were two stages of disaster case management there are two stages of disaster case management introduced in 2014 and 2015. From these graphs, three observations can be made. First, for household with female heads, household recovery was delayed in both samples. Second, the magnitude of disparities varies significantly between two cities. Third, the graph suggests that after the introduction of disaster case management, the gender gap narrowed more rapidly in Sendai and more gradual in Natori City. This graph illustrates the housing recovery trajectory based on household size. Similar to previous one, we observe a significant delay in housing recovery for single-person households. And it also appears that the housing recovery gap narrows with the introduction of disaster case management again. Then I re-examined the effectiveness of disaster case management. In this section, I used the synthetic control method to assess its net effect on housing recovery in Sendai City. Sendai is the first local government in Japan to introduce comprehensive disaster case management. This figure represents the trend of temporary housing occupancy rate in Sendai City and the average temporary housing occupancy rate among other municipalities in Miyagi Prefecture. As you can see, temporary housing occupancy rate in Sendai City differs in trend from other municipality average. So it is difficult to assess the effect of disaster case management simply based on comparison of occupancy rate. To address this issue, we statistically identified municipalities from the other cities whose temporary housing occupancy rate trends closely resembled that of Sendai City. And from these trends, statistically created counterfactual Sendai City, where disaster case management was not implemented. We call it synthetic control. By comparing the counterfactual Sendai City with the actual Sendai City, we were able to evaluate the effectiveness of disaster case management. This city was selected, so it doesn't. yes, these cities are selected for synthetic control. This figure shows the time on the horizontal axis and the temporary housing occupancy rate on the vertical axis. The solid line shows the decline curve of temporary housing occupancy rate in the actual Sendai city, and dot line shows the decline curve of synthetic controlled Sendai city. It can be read that the occupancy rate of temporary housing has dropped significantly in the actual Sendai city compared to synthetic control, synthetic city until April 2015. This difference can be seen as an effect of introduction of disaster case management. So finally, what was the turning point? This is conclusion. Disaster case management was turning point that helped alleviate disparities in housing recovery after the Great East Japan earthquake disaster. Moreover, the experience of disaster case management after the Great East Japan earthquake became a turning point that helped spread disaster case management across Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we have 5 minutes or so for discussions, and because I expected that 10 minutes a bit more. Anna, are you able to sort of summarize or collect the most, most frequently asked questions? Can you just show me the summary, or I can just go back to each panelist to reiterate their point?
Yeah, well, so we have a couple of questions that came in over the Q&A, and I think panelists have been doing their best to answer those as they come in. And so I think most of those have been answered, but we could just select from the ones that haven't yet been answered. We have two, and perhaps I'll just go with the first one that came in, since we have limited time. But it has to do, and I think it's a nice comparative question with the U.S. government's, the U.S. Geological Survey's Shake Alert earthquake early warning system. It's a fairly new system here in the U.S. to give folks warnings about earthquakes ahead of time. And so this question has to do with how did Japan's early warning systems fare during this event, and what changes, if any, were made to it after the earthquake. And I think that's related to a lot of questions we received about early warning and preparedness.
I think in terms of early warning at the onset of the GJ, it didn't really work well. And then system changed. But the major change since the GJE is not much on the technology side, but it's on the recipient side. The most effective early warning is empowered through school education and schema building, or empowering disaster risk reduction literacy among people. So it's receiver side that makes the signal into action. And today, we decided to focus on the recovery side. So I would just take the floor, and I'm going to send the same question. And Miyako did it beautifully. What I would do differently if I were given the chance to start it all over again. Kanako, I'm sorry, I really didn't hear much on that point. So everybody, I'm going to just ask each one of you again, what would you do as a recovery researcher you would do differently when you are given the chance to do it all over again? Kanako, everybody, 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I try to include in the talk. I do want to voice out. I mean, I'm always a supporter of communicative planning. We need to communicate. We need
Okay.
to
Right.
make our place to live more better by our communication, using our knowledge. And in the recovery of Tohoku, I think residents were quiet, and we thought because we were giving all the money and the support, we
Right.
can't say anything. But I think if I were able to go over, we try to pick up the voice of the communities more, and then to try to incorporate in the community, and try not to be isolated from the oceans, and
Yeah.
try to live where we were.
Yeah, that relate to Tamio's point. Could you summarize you would do differently? Now you
Definitely.
spend 15 years, like how to make the land meaningful. That the people, what would you do there's a new onset of the similar kind of event?
Okay, I think the Japanese government, the idea is to treat the coastal land as a space
Mm,
without the meaning,
mm,
just
mm,
thinking
mm,
about the land use. So I
mhm.
would encourage land governance by the multiple sectors, actors, stakeholders, not only discussing the risk, but also the sustainable and livable and resilient way to how to live with the nature.
Great. Tak Sugano, what would you do differently? You did great, using your network, and he actually is a change agent to change the Japanese legal system. But what would you do differently?
Mm. I believe we should have focused on engaging with civil society from an early stage and
Mhm,
involved them in the decision-making process.
mhm.
And I, mm, so that's all.
Yeah, but you created that legal base.
Yeah.
That's a great,
Mm.
advancement. Miwako, you mentioned three different things you would do. Is there anything you want to add or reiterate amongst you? What would be the most important point?
Of course, hearing the community voice and the early stage, including their voice is very important. However, it's always we discuss it, we haven't prepared yet. It
Mm.
means we don't want to say that kind of the word forever. It means we have to communicate in the everyday's life. Think about how the life is very important for the everyday people, everyday life for the everyone. That's the fundamentally important, and how it's we can something to good the kind of information to the policy make as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Fuminori, in 30 seconds, what would you do differently in your research? What you could have done?
Yeah.
If you are
Actually,
giving,
I was a high school student when that's occurred. But yeah, as a quantitative researcher, uh, I believe I should have established a stronger monitoring system to
Mm, mm.
for housing recovery or other life recovery aspect. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that's it. We use up all the time. You have the
Excellent.
time to close.
Yeah, well, I'll just close us out here. But I wanted to thank again our panelists for those excellent conversations. We did a lot with limited time, so thank you so much. I guess I'll just thank everyone for joining us today. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. I will pass along some of those to our panelists to see if they have extra time to continue the discussion. But in the meantime, please save the date for our next Disasters as Turning Points webinar. We'll be marking the 15th anniversary of the Joplin tornado, and details on that are forthcoming, but the date will be set so you can save it in your calendar. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists and to everyone for joining us today. We hope that this was a valuable conversation for all of you listening, and I know it was for me. And thanks again, especially to our panelists for waking up so early in the morning during Japan time. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And bye for now. Okay, thank you very much,
Bye.
panel.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.